Video games have never been more expensive. $70 for broken, unfinished games filled with battle passes and bullshit microtransactions has become the industry standard. Now, are these things added in just to recoup costs? Have gamers lost the plot and not realized that, hey, video games are expensive to make? Well, to be honest, I wasn't sure, so I looked into it. Is it big corpo greed just getting in the way, mismanaging money, and becoming complacent with releasing products that are no good as long as they get their big bonus at the end of the day? Or are gamers just entitled and whining and not happy about having to spend a little bit more money because of the rising cost of games? To be honest, I wasn't really sure. So I looked into it, and TLDR, the answer is just big corpo greed getting in the way. But if you really deep dive into it, there's a lot more to it than that. Did you know the average AAA game costs over $100 million to make? While we've all been paying full price for these titles, many devs are still getting laid off, while CEOs are pulling in millions in bonuses. I'm clearly not the only one person who sees something wrong with this situation. I've researched and read and listened to all sides of the story to understand all of it, and you have to start with the rising cost of video game development and break it down from a business standpoint, and not from a I'm a gamer first standpoint. The first thing is the size of the teams used to make these big AAA games. We're talking about teams that consist of hundreds, sometimes even thousands of people. Developers, artists, animators, sound designers, voice actors, and a lot more. And these people don't come cheap. Back in the 90s, a top-tier game was often made by a handful of people. This doesn't exist in the AAA space anymore. As an example, the development of Red Dead Redemption 2 had over 2,000 people working on it. It took almost 8 years to finish. Top-level devs and talent can make $100K plus annually a year. Do the math. Even before the greedy CEOs step in, the costs are astronomical. Super Mario 64 development budget was $10 million. Halo Combat Evolved, $20 million. The Witcher 3 was developed for well under $100 million. Now fast forward, and games like Cyberpunk cost $200 million just in development costs. That's not including marketing and all the other costs that come with making big AAA titles. Technology and marketing costs are nothing to shrug at either. AAA games often spend as much or more on marketing as they do on the actual game development. Marketing budgets for games like Call of Duty are over $100 million. Cyberpunk was reported to have spent over $60 million on marketing before the game even launched. Okay, so we've established that game development is getting more expensive. But here's the real question. Do games actually need to cost this much, or are companies just throwing money around? Often in the wrong places. When you look at the operations of some of these studios, and you see a lot of the money isn't going towards making better games. It's going towards bloated management, bad decision making, and corporate greed. These companies are overloaded with executives and middle managers. Instead of spending money on actual devs, these studios have layers and layers of management that don't actually contribute to making the game. These people are just a money drain. The actual devs are overworked, while CEOs and execs are sitting and making millions of dollars in bonuses, even when the games flop and fail. When this goes wrong, they resort to laying off up to hundreds of employees at a time, while walking away with golden parachutes worth millions. This does not make good moral or good business sense. Some of these companies are also spending ridiculous amounts of money on things that have nothing to do with game development. Huge fancy offices, spending millions on corporate retreats while at the same time laying off actual devs. Unnecessary big name actors instead of hiring voice actors that would actually be way cheaper and better. Plenty of examples of stupidity from the decision makers. We looked at how the money is spent, but how about the day-to-day operations? With hundreds of millions of dollars being thrown around you, you would think everyone would be happy, right? Well, you would assume so if you had your head in the sand. Developers face things like crunch time. This near end of development crunch is infamous for stress and exhaustion, negative impacts on both physical and mental health. Many big game companies often repeat and report all kinds of mismanagement and mistreatment from the upper management. These kind of problems aren't exclusive to the video game industry, but they seem to run rampant with little change in sight. All of these issues and practices within game development costs and studio management compound into larger problems that lead to a lot of the scummy monetization practices we see within gaming. All the live service nonsense, loot systems, and price schemes you see boil down to not only greed, but because of all the mismanagement, it's often placed to help recoup some of the development costs that shouldn't have had money spent on them in the first place. Asking the AAA industry to adopt fair price models or rethink microtransactions or commit to fully and polished finished game releases is obviously a pipe dream, but it seems that companies will be left with no choice if we continue down the path that the video game industry is currently on. I personally think many games released can fully justify the $60 to $80 price tag, but I don't think it should be the standard. If these big companies were less greedy and had better business sense when it comes to providing gamers with what they want and not mismanaging company funds and budgets, a lot of these monetary savings would be able to be passed down to the consumer, resulting in cheaper games. Even if the company didn't want to pass down the savings, at least you wouldn't have to see mass layoffs on a regular basis, assuming the CEOs and execs wouldn't just up their pay. These savings could be used to keep your company in a healthy spot, eliminating the need for crunch and many other stresses, allowing for the game devs to focus on innovating and worrying about making games instead of worrying about keeping their jobs. You shouldn't have to sell over 2 million copies of your game just to break even. Reviving AA and mid-budget games needs to be a thing. For the cost of marketing Cyberpunk 2077, Sucker Punch was able to make a whole-ass game for that same price. Ghost of Tsushima cost around $60 million to develop, and that was not even a AA game. That was a massive award-winning AAA game. It proves it's possible when the team focuses on what's important and is managed properly. You ever wonder why a lot of the indie and AA games on Steam are totally transparent about their development costs, showing all budgets and breakdowns, but you never even see remotely the same transparency within the AAA scene? It's because they know what they're doing is wrong, and they don't want to show you all their fuckery that they're hiding and misspending on. With the video game industry moving forward, there are some key things that need to happen. If a game is going to justify costing what they do, they need to have no paywalled content, no breaking bugs at launch, no forced microtransactions. We need free demos, we need refund rights, and the studios need to stop overspending where it is not needed. Stop chasing greedy microtransactions and monetization practices, transparency on where our money is going. And I think mostly important, more AA games with smaller budgets that focus on fun and innovation. I don't mean indie games. I want to see these big AAA companies produce more smaller focused titles, similar to what the EA Originals program is doing, but on a larger scale. Okay, with all that being said, can all these changes and creative solutions actually work? If we actually stop mismanaging the money, spend it in the right places, come up with better solutions for all the corpo greed that goes on, and see studios actually do the right thing, can we actually see a change within gaming? Well, my opinion on this has flip-flopped back and forth a couple of times, but these things are going to crash out if we don't see a change. I think they're starting to see with all the cancellation of the newest live service games that they had in production and all the other things going on that CEOs, or at least the big companies, whether they want to or not, are seeing that, hey, some things are going to have to change. We're probably just going to move back to more single player style titles and less multiplayer focused live service type focused games. And we're going to see CEOs and game devs focus more on, smaller budget titles. And I don't mean indie games again. I mean like something with a little bit more of a pulled back budget. We don't need to be spending $300 million to make a video game. The licensing for that game for Spider-Man 2 alone cost what it costs to make a video game itself. So, I think game publishers need to stop being so greedy and finding ways to just scam money out of us and focus on what's important, making the video games fun. When you do that, you don't even need big marketing budgets. Word of mouth alone will sell your game. All right. So I think with that being said, I've said all I have to say, and I appreciate you guys being here. Thank you for hearing me ramble on and listening to me. I'm out.